Anthony Farrington, Chair of the Lake County Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors had a special meeting today where we took up a number of items related to the Rocky Fire incident. We took up an item where we would give actually consideration to look at one or two options as it pertains to removal of debris and environmental damage as a result of the catastrophic event. The one option was for the county to incur most, if not all, the cost and to utilize staff, but because of the enormity and the cost involved, we were forced really to look at option two, which was to rely on state assistance. So the actions that we acted upon today was contingent upon receiving those monies, utilizing those monies with a projected cost for remediation and cleanup of about $4 to $5 million. About 10% of that will be allocated for administrative fees, the cost to cover counties' obligations and staffing at the local level. The other item that we did act upon, at least from a policy consideration perspective, is looking at potentially waiving permit fees and building fees for residences and or other structures or garages. Right now it's really was just the intent was to check the temperature of the board, see if there's an openness to possibly waiving fees for reconstruction. Some of the board members had concerns that it would be a bonus or a gift to insurance companies or public funds. We will be bringing that back for future discussion to actually fine-tune that policy, but it appears that the board is unanimous to work with members of the public to allow them to pull permits if they have legally done so previously or in the past or predated where permits were required. The other issue that we took up was a request by Social Services, a number of preliminary tasks as it relates to providing temporary shelters, working with committees, policing donations to the credit unions such as Mendo Lake Credit Union and other nonprofits, and moving forward with logistics as it pertains to providing temporary shelters and partnering with nonprofits such as the American Cross and the Lake County chapter here. And then lastly, the board took up two resolutions for consideration. One was tied to option one, which would have been if the board had picked a policy where we would incur all the costs and do all the labor and deal with the environmental degradation, damage, and remediation. We would offer and adopt that resolution, or if we selected option two, which we had today, was a resolution that basically allowed us to move forward under option two and devise a plan for remediation contingent upon both advancement and reimbursement of state assistance monies. And lastly, I should say, I digress, there's one other action that we did take, which was really securing the right for us to have free state monies flow freely to the county of Lake, and that was adopting a state of emergency proclamation as presented by our public health officer, Dr. Karen Tate. So we acted on all those swiftly and efficiently, and we'll be continuing the work beginning next Tuesday. Don't panic, and thank the firefighter. They're doing a wonderful job. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lake County Board of Supervisors meeting. This is our special meeting, which is dated August the 11th, 2015. And that, as customary for our board meetings, to stand in a moment of silence. Thank you. Jim Brown, would you do us the honors with the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And generally for our meetings, we have consent items and timed items in closed session. Today for the special meeting, we're only going to be taking up our non-timed item, which is number 4. And 4.1 reads as discussion, consideration of county policies and actions to address recovery from the Rocky Fire, included but not limited to the following: A, debris removal and environmental remediation in burn areas; B, building permit waivers and any other policies to assist fire victims; C, temporary shelters for victims, fire victims; and D, consideration of a resolution amending fiscal year 15-16 recommended budget to appropriate funds for fire response and recovery. Matt, would you like to begin?
Good afternoon. So as everyone is well aware, the Rocky Fire broke out on July 29th. It's grown to over 69,000 acres, destroyed 43 residents and 53 outbuildings. And while we had the Emergency Operations Center activated, we identified various issues in the recovery process for your board to consider. Last Thursday, I submitted a request to the Governor's Office of Emergency Services for California Disaster Assistance Act funding. We believe are still waiting on confirmation of receiving that funding. And a lot of the policies that the board will be discussing today, I believe, hinge on whether that funding is to be received. We'll go ahead and proceed and lay out the various policies for you, and then like to assess the status of receiving that funding. We received a federal management assistance grant, which pays 75% of the response costs, but a lot of recovery costs, and then 25% of the cost is still associated with the county or the state. With the FMA, the Federal Management Assistance Grant, the state will pay 75% of the remaining 25% that the federal government doesn't cover. The first item for your board to discuss is the debris management plan removal. We've been advised that the charred remains of the structures, the ash and so forth, contains hazardous materials, and put together a plan to dispose of those hazardous materials. It's not only just on site, but the possibility of someone just cleaning it up and throwing it in the back of the truck and driving down the highway, and it could affect other areas as well, not just on location. So it's basically two options for the cleanup of debris. Have it be the responsibility of the property owner with some regulatory oversight by the county, by environmental health. This has some ability to protect the public health and safety, but it's not a comprehensive approach. Speaking with Community Development Director Rick Crowell, he confirmed that if a property owner doesn't clean up the property, code enforcement actions could be initiated. Given the fact that, and I think we'll hear a report from Audrey pretty soon from planning on the damage assessment report, but given the fact that a lot of these structures were unpermitted, probably uninsured, and so on, I have concerns whether or not the property owners are going to clean it up themselves. And so we're presenting option 2, which would be a coordinated response funded by the state. If we receive the the California Disaster Assistance Act funding, they would fund 100% of this cleanup of the debris. This has the highest cost, but also the highest assurance of complete environmental cleanup, preventing exposure and protecting the public health and safety. We would have to initiate actions with the property owners to receive their right of entry, and we have a draft agreement for that. And again, if the owner refuses to cooperate, Rick said that code enforcement efforts could be initiated as well on that option. Prior to the cleanup by a contractor, the Department of Toxic Substance Control with the state would go in and remove any obviously hazardous materials and such things as propane tanks and things like that. So we coordinate with that state agency as well. So I think at this point, maybe is the presentation ready, Jeff? Okay.
Matt, can I ask you a question real quick, whether maybe getting the presentation set up, the proclamation, maybe I'm jumping a little ahead, for the debris removal item in option 1 and 2. Maybe my question is either you or Anita, do we need the title of the agenda to have consideration of that proclamation, or is it incorporated therein under 4.1A? There's no actual title for the proclamation consideration. Is that a problem for today for us to act upon that if we decide?
I believe that your board could consider it under debris removal and environmental remediation, since the proclamation goes to those issues, the hazardous materials, and that informs your board's decisions then going forward.
Matt, you mentioned, you said, I'm not exactly sure what you said, but the way it sounded, most of whom don't have insurance. Do we know that for sure?
We're collecting that information on whether or not they're insured, but we do know that a lot of them appear to be unpermitted.
Would that, I guess that means they're not insured. I mean, I don't know anything about the insurance business, but is it automatically assumed? Because whenever I buy insurance, I've never had them come and say, well, can I see your permit first? So I don't know how that works.
Well, we're still collecting that information. In fact, the local assistance center that opened up yesterday and is continuing today and tomorrow, trying to collect that information on the level of insurance or underinsurance that the owners have.
Okay.
And the focus of our discussion is on those 43 residents that have been destroyed in the fire, not some of the structures as well, or is it all encompassing?
I don't know, Ray, or Tom?
Yes. Residences.
Ray, I'm going to have to get you the mic. Apologize. State first and last name for
I'm Ray Romanski, County Health Department, to answer the question about the scope of the burned buildings. My understanding is it's the residences and the destroyed outbuildings. CAL FIRE's inventory of damages recognizes an outbuilding if it's 120 square feet.
Supervisor Comstock?
Well, our concern is for the removal of all the hazardous material and the cleanup. And just because it isn't residence doesn't mean it doesn't have to be cleaned up. And it might have hazardous, so for the cleanup part, I think we got to consider all of it. Because we're trying to get the area cleaned up and prepared, and whether they're unpermitted or not, which is another problem. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be cleaned up. So we got to be pretty much all encompassing on this part. Another part, I'll have a very different opinion.
Supervisor Smith?
Well, I think the outbuildings are more likely to have hazardous materials in them than the residences are. So, I think it's got to be everything that's fine.
Still working to get technical logistics. Is there anything else we can move on while they're still getting set up?
Yeah, I think we can do that. So you mentioned the declaration of the health emergency, proclamation of health emergency by the public health officer. That is a requirement in order to receive the state funding to fund the debris cleanup. And Dr. Karen Tate has prepared that, and for your board's consideration if you choose to pursue option 2, the debris cleanup.
Can we go ahead and delve into that right now while we're, maybe Dr. Tate, you can come up and speak to the proclamation. I did receive a call late last night from Senator McGuire. I'm sure he's been in communication with our staff as well in the department, urging the importance of us acting upon this proclamation to help free up monies to flow from the state. So
Okay, well,
that's what is being presented for consideration here today.
very much in my later. Okay, well, as has been mentioned, the burned debris of these buildings is considered hazardous waste due to the potential presence of asbestos, heavy metals, byproducts of plastic material that has burned. And I've been counseled that the sheer number of buildings involved right now is really enough to elevate this to a higher level of concern for the community as a whole because of the absolute numbers of buildings that are involved. So We have prepared a proclamation of a local health emergency for your consideration. This would pave the way to request the assistance that is needed to intervene quickly. The time is pretty much of the essence because of the large number of properties and the desire really to clean them up as quickly as possible before citizens are exposed through going on to properties and agitating the ash and hopefully to keep a handle on the ability to transport this safely for disposal in an appropriate facility as well. The proposed program through the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, the private property debris removal program, does set a fairly high bar for a good cleanup. That does provide a certain measure of reassurance to the property owner that when this process is done, that their property will be very safe. It is possible for property owners to opt out of the program and undertake it at their own expense, but that would be still subject to the standards that are being set by this program.
Any questions or comments? Dr. Tate? Brother Steele?
The method of threat is what, airborne?
Yes, primarily airborne, yes.
Supervisor Comstock?
Thank you. The opting out, you made the statement that no one opted, that's fine, but still has to be cleaned up, and so they're subject to
Yes, it does.
the same regulations, because that's the important part here.
Right.
is that this hazard is removed.
Right, and as I understand it, a condition of utilizing this program does obligate the county to oversee the process and to assure that appropriate enforcement does take place, whether it's done by the contractor arranged through the program or if it's done individually.
Or self-done.
By a property owner.
Yeah, because that's important, that there's oversight. Someone may just choose to opt out and not do anything, and that is not an option.
And that's not an option.
Just to follow up on that, so the county is oversighting, and what are the degrees of certification necessary if the homeowner wants to do this themselves? It seems like they're placing themselves at risk, right, if it's airborne.
Right, I mean, yeah, and Mr. Gray might be better prepared to talk a little bit about that, but in terms of process. But clearly, a property owner going in on a do-it-yourself basis does place themselves at significant risk and could place other people around them through, agitating the ash, improperly transporting debris, not evaluating the debris as to whether it is hazardous or not. So there's a lot of technical issues involved with doing this well, and that's what we're hoping to see.
And the landfill issue is there, where it's placed in the landfill. So there must be some certification of that. And then the other question would be, if it rains and all the dust settles, does that change the risk here at all? Or is it elevated?
As I understand it, not entirely, because even though it would help settle the ash and prevent it from going airborne, there are issues of watershed, and so some of these, like heavy metals, could enter the watershed through that process.
When the work teams mobilize at a site, I mean, part of their job is to prevent the airborne, and they'll actually wet the ash material so that and they'll wet it so they're safer to handle, but not to cause erosion and runoff. Back it up a little. There's two kinds of waste here. One is the stuff that people would have in their buildings, homes, or outbuildings, or garages, or barns, or sheds. They can easily be identified and picked up and handled. The other component of the waste is the actual burned building, burned up into dust, and that's what we're talking about on the airborne hazard. And that's what we're talking about when we say possibly asbestos or fine metals or some of the organic chemicals.
Supervisor Smith?
Well, I think we need to be just as concerned about the runoff and everything if we get anything like they're talking this year. And that's that's where I think we will have to be real specific on time frame too. This has got to be done quickly. And because we could run into a winter condition that would really put everything down on our streets and lakes. That works. So we have to be concerned about it all the way around. I'm just, looking at some of the burned buildings, and I think we're probably going to get into this anyway. We have to be real cognizant of the folks that have lost everything and giving them time to go try to find stuff that they can, that they want, to try to find. And then at the same time, though, as far as I'm concerned, we need to have a mechanism, and what comes to mind is a red tag, because even though we red tag something, we always work with property owners. But I've found in other fires in the past, we haven't gotten out there, and not even especially countywide, but I know in the city of Clear Lake, there were some places out there that should have been red tagged as soon as it burned. So we had a mechanism when the owners didn't clean up or didn't do what they were supposed to do, to be able to move in and, in a certain time frame. Sure, we want to work with them and give them as long as possible, but when it starts becoming a hazard for everybody else, then we need to be able to act. And I think the mechanism is to red tag almost every building that burnt. So we have that at our disposal at the end if we have to act. Otherwise, we have to go through that process, and that process takes a lot of time to do. So, and we need to tell the folks that are working with us and everything else that we only did this just in case to protect the rest of the public. But as far as I'm concerned, we need to pretty much act on almost everything, just so we have that tool in our toolbox to use if we have to.
Any other questions or comments? We're still close to the presentation. Yes, Jim?
One thing, it's the education of the people that if they are going to go out there and sift through that stuff, they need to know that it could have some toxic elements to it. So it's not something they should just go do. They want to check out procedures before they go out there.
And is Rick going to be down?
Rick is on vacation.
That's right, he's on vacation.
But
Is there any other staff?
Audrey, representing the Built Department, can probably give a report. We did have building inspectors and code enforcement go out on site on Saturday and Sunday, and they did red tag the structures, correct, Audrey?
Yes.
In response to Jess?
Yes,
Jess'
we've red tagged at least 91, and it's a combination of structures and other hazardous debris fields that we found on site.
So should I ask that question first? Would it save me?
Well, should I proceed with just a few more things while you're waiting? Okay. So item number 2 under the debris cleanup is public lands, and this is just for your board's information only. The federal agencies work with a program called Burned Area Emergency Response. It is quite comprehensive, and there's some information for kind of a summary of what they do. Information for your board on the practices of the federal agencies working with this BAER program. The next item while we're waiting here is just consideration of building permit fees for reconstruction. Some agencies that have suffered these mass burned areas offer a fee waiver for building permits. And Rick Colwell drafted a very preliminary policy. I wouldn't expect the board to act on that today. I don't think that's necessary. We would probably want to refine it further. One of the conditions that's in here is that it would be waived for permitted structures only. If someone had an unpermitted structure, I don't think it's appropriate to give them the benefit of that waiver. And also, it would be for a limited period of time. We wouldn't want to extend this out for 2 or 3 years. It would have to be 6 to 12 months, some reasonable period of time to rebuild. The other issue with this is, again, if we receive the California Disaster Assistance Act funding, any extraordinary costs that we incur for the recovery would be covered under this funding. Given the shortages in the community development department, we would be looking at contracting out the plan checking, building inspection costs, and the state would fund that, and so the county wouldn't lose the revenue. We'd waive the fee, but we'd also be reimbursed from the state for the cost of those associated services. And so I think that really the only action point for your board for today on that is whether or not you want to direct staff to continuing to refine a policy on building fee waivers. And then you can take that up.
Matt, you indicated other jurisdictions when confronted with a catastrophic event, they've been able to legally waive those fees. There's no issue of, and maybe Anita as well can jump in, give to public funds or for private use for waiver for construction.
These are generally
Justified.
carefully crafted so that, again, I think the point that Matt made, someone's already had a building permit, they lost the structure through no fault of their own.
Right.
So it would be essentially preventing a double payment. It would likely run into gift of public funds issues were you to do it for people who hadn't had permits.
Well, and I think that's, I'm predicting that board hopefully has some consensus on that rewarding, not the reward is the right word, but it does create, I think, some problems where people haven't went through the necessary legal process to get into the entitlement and to waive that fee subsequently. I don't know, maybe we'll have a good discussion on who's next, Supervisor Brown or Comstock. Supervisor Comstock?
They're going to be, I am very much in favor of not wanting to aid and abet those that were parroting things out there. There is one issue. For example, I can 100% guarantee my house never had a building permit because I know it was built at least back in 1918. So, but it's on the property tax rolls. So there's going to have to be a mechanism. And barns, ranch, but barns are not permitted to a certain size, but they're on, like, you can check my property tax rolls, it's every building I've ever thought of doing. So yeah, not just permitted, but that there's some evidence that it was there for the right reason, even though it was 100 years ago.
Ag exemption, for instance.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Because I'm not into even considering aiding those that were would be considered pirated out there.
Yeah, the couple of issues that Supervisor Comstock raised was on the draft policy. Number one, this is at the top of page 4 on my memo. The dwelling would be constructed under permit unless the original construction predates the requirements for a building permit.
Yep.
And also, Rick's draft policy is that the permit fee exemption would be for dwellings only and not for outbuildings or garages. And again, that's up for your board's consideration, of course, but that's just a kind of something for discussion.
And of course, the goal today is not to really get into the weeds and specifics of that, just to have a general approval that we are open to developing that policy, right? That's what
Right.
you're looking for. Supervisor Brown?
Well, I mean, we all want to do the right thing, we want to do the good thing, but I'm glad Jim brought up that fact because I was going to mention that not everybody who lives in an unpermitted structure is living in an illegal structure. It's not always the same. There are a lot of old homes around that didn't have permits, but they're legal and they have insurance. I'm sure that they have insurance on them. And the other thing is, do we want to have a policy that just says we'll waive the permit fees, or do we want to have a policy that says we'll issue the permit pending reimbursement from the insurance company? Because basically what we're going to end up doing is giving a charity to the insurance company and not to the landowner. We want to help them out and expedite it, but why should the taxpayers fund a permit that the insurance company would otherwise be? Basically, we're letting the insurance companies off of their responsibility. And then at what point does someone who lost their home in this tragic fire differ from somebody who lost their home in a fire 6 months ago? So, I mean, if we're going to help people whose homes have been replaced, why is this the only exception? So, I mean, if somebody doesn't have insurance and they're hard up and they need their permit and everything, that's one thing. But to just give a broad exception that basically we're getting the insurance companies off the hook from doing their job. I'm not so sure that's what we're going to do here. I'm not sure that's best for anybody.
Yeah. I think we'll probably be all agreeable with that. That's a good idea. Are you ready to?
Sure,
Ready? She
anytime.
jumps in, Matt, with the.
Yep.
Anytime.
Lights, thank you.
Right, so I'm gonna give you an overview. We sent out 3 teams on Friday afternoon, covering Double Eagle and Morgan Valley. We sent out 5 teams on Saturday to cover mostly the Morgan Valley area. These are teams from county staff. We sent pairs of 2. And from environmental health as well as community development. We ended up posting a total of 91 sites. CAL FIRE reported 40 single families attached and 9 mobile homes for a total of 49. County staff estimates 5 to 10% of these had building permits, or as you guys were previously discussing, were built before building permits were required. Again, county staff have posted 91 properties with roughly 18 more to be posted. These are on gated roads. And we're estimating the 18 from a gap in syncing with CAL FIRE's damage report that we received over the weekend. These are some of the debris fields we're encountering out there to give you a sense of some of the scale of cleanup involved and some of the materials. Anything before 1980 generally is going to have asbestos issues if constructed before that time. There were a total of 61 outbuildings reported by CAL FIRE. We're collectively calling these outbuildings and camps. County staff estimates between 10 to 20% of these were living environments. So anything that might have been classified as an outbuilding, we found some compound, I guess they're called compounds, living environments in several buildings grouped together, and accoutrements that would indicate it's a living environment, essentially. We have posted hazards on property where we encountered propane tanks and other items that were leaking, particularly where a well might have been impacted by burn, other things, even though perhaps the property or other items weren't damaged. So we have been trying to get all hazards, regardless of whether it was a complete burn or not, posted on the affected areas. We're still outgoing to try to get on top of that. So but these are some of the areas when you start looking at the metals, extensive fields of debris with multiple tanks, chemicals, and smaller structures that may or may not have been counted by CAL FIRE. So far, staff has followed up when they were out in the field and encountered people out there. They've talked with community residents and found other properties, at this point 17 documented sites that may or may not have been covered by CAL FIRE's report, which we're further verifying. So ongoing, we're continuing to post for hazards. We're in the process of summarizing assessed improvement value of all of the properties impacted, the debris removal and cleanup, and then rebuilding. This is a photo taken by Keith Grondike, one of our staff members. He's also an excellent photographer, and we have this posted as Paradise Lost. So I just wanted to give you a sample of some of the damage. We have complete files, multiple slides. This is just a sampling. There are burned out buses, there are burned out vehicles. There are many fuel tanks. This is predominantly rural and wildland, so off-the-grid living and fuel is predominant on a lot of these sites. That concludes the brief presentation. Any questions?
Any questions of Andre, Supervisor Still?
Is there any plan by CAL FIRE who issues the recommendations of 30-foot and 100-foot setbacks to look at these to see whether or not the setbacks actually protected the houses?
Oh, the 100-foot,
Yeah, the 30 and 100, there was two different zones. And it would give us some valuable information as to whether or not what we're doing to protect our house actually works.
well, you know, we had quite a number of reports from the field where that 100-foot clearance made a substantial difference. They were able to pull in their fire trucks and stand against the fire and protected homes. From field reports, a house across the street is standing and the one next door is burned. And in one case, a woman's owned two properties or two homes, and one of the homes burned and her stayed safe, predominantly because of that 100-foot clearance.
So the one lost did not have the setbacks. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Matt, are you going to go into more about option 1 and 2 for the board's consideration in terms of private property owners and then securing state funding and some of the pros and cons with both?
Well, I just kind of wanted the board to hear the status of our request for the California Disaster Assistance Act funding. As you know, the Director of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Mark Gudarucci, was here last week. The board met him and other officials. Governor Brown was at the site on Highway 16. You know, we've heard very encouraging words that funding will be obtained. We just haven't received confirmation of it. We've gotten a lot of support from the Cal OES staff. Some are here today. We just haven't received confirmation of that funding. I was hoping to receive it by noon today, and I've been advised that it's in progress. We just haven't received it. I think that's just really critical. I want the board to be aware of the status, and because option 2 is quite extensive, and it would be funded by California Disaster Assistance Act funding. If it's not going to be funded that way, you're going to have a hard time absorbing those costs purely by the county. So,
the other board members feel the immediate reaction is, I think 1 would be more streamlined, possibly, even though there'd be quite a bit of demand on staff, especially code enforcement, building inspectors. The costs are obviously a concern. The concern I have with option 2 is though it's kind of I don't mean this in a negative sense, but kind of the delay in getting that funding here. We've experienced, I'll give an example of Lakeside Heights and declaration of emergency and getting monies for the slide. Sometimes there can be quite a delay, and I know
The recall election in Gray Davis.
in getting money from the recall election,
Still waiting on that.
SB 90 reimbursements and everything else under mandate. So that's concerns I have when time is of the essence, when you have some of these materials that are toxic and hazardous. You're dealing with either that or air quality issues, and I don't know how we can really balance and address that, not knowing truly how long it's going to take before we're able to get that assistance and get that funding and bring in the work that needs to be done sooner than later. I don't even know how to engage that with the timing, but also at the same time, I know that it's very hard for us to absorb those costs. It doesn't leave us with many options. You concur with that? Or?
Yeah. I think it would be very difficult it'd be impossible for the county to absorb the cost of a comprehensive program.
So that makes it pretty.
I'm also concerned about, this is an opportunity if the state provides the funding, because if we don't clean it up, I'm concerned about people leaving it there or illegal dumping elsewhere.
Right.
Those are the trade-offs. There's, I don't know if Sean Smith from Cal OES could speak on the status of the request for this funding.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Sean Smith from the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. So to speak to what Mr. Perry was speaking about was the California Disaster Assistance Act funding. for the debris removal would be eligible under what we consider to be an emergency protective measure, because you're protecting life or health and safety in this case of the general public. Now, the way funding, Chairman, to kind of set you at ease with the funding, the way the California Disaster Assistance Act funding works, in the case of an emergency protective measure, which this is, we can advance the funds rather than do a reimbursement process. And we would advance the funds through the controller's office in a pretty expedited manner. I think in the city of Weed, last year when we did this program, we got the funds there in less than 15 days from the time it was granted. In the case of this emergency and this disaster in your county, you guys have far surpassed any cost that you had in the December storms. So I don't think, from our standpoint, that approval is questionable. You know, we provided it for a much smaller disaster. I don't see that being any case now. It's just the bureaucratic timeline that the state takes to get it to the governor's office and get it approved and get it back out. But those approvals usually take about 10 days. You guys put it forward on Thursday, so I was hoping to have it by today. I know Matt was, and so we've been trying, but I would expect in the next few days the approval. So what you could do is you could approve the folks to go ahead and start creating a debris plan for whichever option you choose, and then fully adopt it at next Tuesday's meeting, which by then you should have the commitment of the funding, and we can go ahead and advance the funding at that point. So the funding would be in the county's hands, in your controller's hands, prior to any debris operation starting. This way you're not having to come out of pocket on any of the costs. We also provide a 10% administrative allowance, which covers your unreimbursed county costs for that. So that way you're not, so in this case we estimated it to be about a $4 or $5 million debris removal. So we would provide about 10%, we would provide 10%. So it'd be about $500,000 in admin that's used for unreimbursed costs. So for some of your staff that aren't direct project, some, we usually say the financial folks, usually they don't fall into a direct project cost, but you have costs to administer the grants and carry that. And those are the kind of costs that would go under admin. So we do cover your admin costs, so your unreimbursed costs also are funded. So with the, and that's the debris removal side. You guys have questions?
On that projected debris removal of 4 to 5 million, how much is, maybe I missed this, the advanced portion, how much are you going to advance before?
As much as you guys need. We could advance it. Usually what we'll do is sit down with your fiscal folks, and as they're writing the contracts, there's always a portion that has to be put out in the contract initially. So we will advance, usually what we did with the city of Weed last year, we advanced 50% right up front. Okay. They didn't even need that much, but we did it. We also did Mono County that way.
So this process is much more streamlined than some of the other disasters.
Yes, because normal disaster funding under the California Disaster Assistance Act, or even the Stafford Act on FEMA, it's a reimbursement process. But because we're under an emergency for the debris, and you're under a public health emergency, or you will be if you guys adopt that, we can move those funds quickly because we're dealing with public safety here, as opposed to you're repairing a road and the road just takes long to repair, and it's a reimbursement process on those projects. So this falls into kind of a different category under life and safety.
Good. Appreciate that. Any questions for John? Questions? Thank you so much for the information.
Yeah, no problem.
Good information.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Matt, on?
Just kind of wrap up that particular topic. If you choose option 2, there'll be additional steps. You've already addressed and discussed the local public health emergency. Also request waiving the requirement for competitive bidding. The purchasing ordinance allows the board to find that it's not in the public interest during a local declared state of emergency. And then again, due to the urgency of the item, I would request that you authorize myself to execute the contracts, and we certainly engage environmental health and building safety in administering those contracts. So those additional items. And also, given the timing, if we receive the CDA funding, authorize myself to sign the grant agreement and so forth. There's one other item that I want to cover, and that's the amendment to the budget.
Consideration for 2 resolutions.
And again, this, so option 1 appropriates $250,000. That's doesn't take into account the CDAA funding, being a reduction from contingencies. We're recommending that the board establish a special budget unit for disaster response and recovery, and take money out of contingencies to address that. Those are costs for the sheriff's office, for the county staff and the emergency operations center, those kinds of costs, but it doesn't include any of the debris removal, any of those, really significant costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is, I'm not going to minimize 250, but it doesn't incorporate that debris removal, which is the really expensive part. Option number 2 for the resolution doesn't recognize the money from the state for the debris removal. It also has just a rough estimate from the federal funding. As I mentioned, they pay 75%. We have to sort out which costs are eligible and so forth, and so the figures are just a real rough estimate for federal reimbursement and state reimbursement. So again, those 2 contracts, and then, or excuse me, those two resolutions. Carol Hutchinson has a separate report on services to the individuals, temporary shelter, and so forth. And the board would like to hear from her now.
Carol?
Thank you. So basically, what I have prepared is a report that should be considered a working draft as we gather more information about those who suffered destroyed or damaged homes. This plan and what we need to do will become more complete. But what we know so far are the numbers that have reported to both the Red Cross Client Service Center and then also the county's local assistance center. And for the most part, the numbers represent the same folks. There may be 1 or 2 exceptions. But yesterday was the first day of the local assistance center, and 6 households came forward, 5 of which identified themselves as owners and 1 was a renter. 3 of the owners did report that they had homeowners insurance, and staff out there at the LAC is gathering information about coverage. Most of the folks were seeking help with debris removal and cleanup. One party who actually was a renter was seeking a new place to rent, but also worked in the area for a neighbor in the burn area, and so she had lost her job in the course of the fire. And so that was impacting her ability to afford rental housing. So the preliminary tasks that are in front of us in terms of addressing a temporary shelter plan or transitional housing for these folks is, first of all, to gather all the data that comes forward from the completion of the LAC. We have the customer service center data, but the LAC is ongoing today and tomorrow. I am told that as of 1 o'clock today, however, no one had reported today. So the numbers that we may be dealing with may be relatively small, as I think would be consistent with the damage assessment that was presented to you a little while ago about the nature of these properties and the So a next order of business would be to establish a long-term care committee, which would include many of the partner agencies that we've been working with all along the way to meet and decide the role and capacity of each agency to meet the longer-term needs of those affected. At the same time, also develop the committee that will determine the process for applying for the funds that are donated to the fund established at Mendel Lake Credit Union. And as Matt and I have discussed, the intention would be that at a minimum, applicants that apply would have occupied permitted structures that were in compliance with the county ordinance code, of course taking into consideration some of the older property considerations, the same concept that you discussed earlier.
Carol, on number 3 with the Mendel Lake Credit Union and donations, I also saw in the, I think it was Lake County News, there was a release that Redwood Credit Union is doing the same.
We just saw that today. There is that, and then there are other small grassroots efforts as well. And so if you would skip to my point number 5, as appropriate, we would ask
Other entities?
that the committee that's working on the fund and the ability to develop the criteria for disbursement and make those disbursements, also seek out the other entities that are gathering funds in hope of pooling it all in one place. And the director of NCO reported to me right before coming in here today that thus far at Mineral Lake Credit Union, there are about $10,000 raised. And then again, with hope of using the California Disaster Assistance Act funds, we'd like to establish a system for county issuance of temporary housing vouchers as needed for up to 3 to 6 months to affect those folks that have lost them. Again, with the same concept in mind about permitted compliance structures. There's already been some reaching out done to neighboring counties to determine if they have sheltering and housing resources. As your board knows, Lake County does not have any kind of shelter set up. The neighboring counties do, but limit those to residents of their counties. So it does not appear that that will be an option for any of our folks needing rehousing. And then also, we intend to reach out to private sector disaster related support, such as realtors that can help these folks find housing stock for rent. You're aware of some RV parks that have given reduced base rent during the disaster. So we want to establish a list of resources. But again, so far, based on those reporting to the local assistance center, the numbers are not huge. They appear to be a manageable set of numbers. So really the next order of business for this phase of the process is to convene all of the agencies involved later this week or the first of next week at the very latest and make plans to take these steps.
And then Carrie, your request to the board is consensus of these preliminary tasks as requested in your memo. Motion. Thank you. Any questions, Supervisor Steele?
Well, actually, I had the question earlier, but not of Carol. It was about the two options. I don't know if this is the perfect time for it.
Carol, you want to remain seated in case there's any other dialogue? Go ahead, Supervisor Steele. Do that.
Yeah, the question came back to the option 2 and the option 1 language. On option 2, it says, whereas the county has been awarded, and since we haven't been awarded, we can't really take option 2. And option 1 says, whereas the county has requested additional funding, which is what we've done, it limits us only to option 1. So is there a way to bridge that?
Yeah, we could easily change the wording in either one. The resolution for option 2 could easily be changed.
Okay, in order to allow it, contingent on.
Right, I was feeling pretty confident that I'd hear by now, so.
Well, I was just worried about the absolute language and
No,
whether or not we were
no.
being limited here. All right.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Anything with Carol or Ray? We're good, thank you. All right. Should we open up and see if there's any members of the public that have any input at this time? Okay, so we've covered some ground regarding debris removal, environmental remediation. We've also looked conceptually at potentially going to have the board consider waiving certain policies and fees to assist the fire victims. We've had a discussion on temporary shelter and resolution. 2 resolutions will be considered depending on which option the board selects moving forward with clean remediation. So if you're going to speak on these items, I'd like you to address, keep the comments focused to those items that are before the board today for its consideration. Just come on up and approach the lectern and please state your first and last name. Is there any members of the public who would like to speak on any of these items? That's first. So can't complain. Looks like everyone likes the direction we're going, so appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the board to take up these items and in order, and hopefully staff can guide us such as well. Regarding the debris removal, I think it's apparent that option 1 is pretty much a non-starter given the magnitude of costs. And from the direction of the board to go with option 2, would you need that by consensus or motion? contingent upon state funding.
By motion. And then to do it by motion.
Okay. So what's
So how would that language look?
Well, let's see, we have,
Motion
you would
to
have,
pursue option 2, and as Sean mentioned, we'd come back before the board with a complete removal plan next week.
Well, okay, let me ask you this, Matt, because sometimes we don't, sometimes we assume that you're reading our minds appropriately. Are we giving you enough input through this discussion where we can move forward, or do you need
Well,
clarity on anything?
I just want to make sure that, option 2 is the comprehensive, make sure we're all talking about the same option. So option 2 would be, is as described in the memo, the comprehensive plan that the county initiates by a master contract, rather than leaving it up to the property owner.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
and then in that motion, if selected number 2, then we would look at the 3 recommendations for confirming the existence of a local public health emergency, looking at a waiver of competitive bidding requirements per our ordinance because of this time of emergency, and then authorizing you to execute those contracts associated with debris removal, correct? And then additionally, we would have to act, would it be separately on the proclamation for declaration of emergency of the public health?
Yes.
So that would be the first motion for the board to consider. Selecting option 2 with those 3 components, and then subsequent to that, we would act on the proclamation separately,
Contingent upon receiving funds.
contingent upon receiving state assistance. Would like to
Mr.
be
Chair,
honest.
I move as stated.
We have a motion to reflect selection of option 2, contingent upon state assistance and funding, and in that motion are those 3 items of stating confirming public emergency, waiver of requirement of competitive bidding process, ordinance 2-32, authorizing administrative officer, purchase agent to execute contract. First and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Entertain a adoption, motion of approval of the proclamation of local health emergency by Lake County Health Officer.
So moved.
Second motion and a second, with multiple seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next, we'll take up the request for input for consensus or direction regarding building permit waivers and other policies. What's the pleasure of the board regarding this item? If there is a desire, we will bring that back for fine tuning and address the board's concerns. We think it's fair and
We're
equitable.
not really going to take action today on that, we just offered input.
Just direct staff. I think we don't want to pursue it if the board's not supportive of it. So.
I think we have unanimous consensus to
I think so.
pursue that policy. Okay.
With the concerns that we...
Right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could I
Carol.
ask a question related to the action you just took?
For the consensus on the waiver or back to the option 2?
The option 2.
contingent on state
Staff at the LAC just contacted me via text. I understand that county public works staff is not at the LAC at this time, and they had some people coming in wanting debris removal information. So this this action that you just took is going to affect the messaging that is given to those people out of the LAC now, isn't it? And so how are we going to communicate with staff at the LAC what they should tell people that come in with debris removal questions?
Yeah, I think Ray and maybe Sean, people from Cal Recycle, we can get together right after this meeting and put together a good message.
Thank you.
Okay. Good question. Thank you. All right, next let's take up the request from Carol in Social Services. She's presented a memo for temporary shelter plan, and in that memo there is a number of preliminary tasks that she is requesting as delineated 1 through 7 in her memorandum. You just need a consensus on that, or directing staff to approval and moving forward with the implementation of these preliminary tasks. Do we have consensus on that by the board? We have consensus on that, Carol. And then lastly, we have the resolutions for consideration, and it looks like we're tentatively going in directed to go to option 2. Was there some amendments that we need to make to
Yeah.
that resolution for option 2?
Right, so the sixth, I think it's the sixth whereas statement, where it says the county has been awarded, if you amend that to state has requested. So you delete been awarded and just replace with requested.
So we're trusting the state.
That's true.
Just saying.
Any other amendments to this resolution that we're taking up, which is going to be, it's titled, which is the best we have, is the option 2 resolution? Any other language, any other changes before board's consideration offering of said resolution?
Right. Just one suggestion on that. Instead of requested, has been tentatively awarded, because they basically are saying it's about to be awarded, and I'd like to reflect that offer from the state that it's just about to be awarded. And then if it isn't, we can go back and say, hey, it wasn't awarded, and our resolution is. It's just a thought. I'm concerned about the language right now. Because if we've requested it and it's been denied, then we're stuck with this particular plan going forward, right?
Well, we would think we'd have to abort this plan if the whole premise is that it's contingent upon state assistance and funding.
Okay, is that appropriate? Is that adequate, what we've said here?
Yeah, and I guess I'm looking to Sean for correct wording here, but I don't know if tentatively awarded, but in progress. and I mean, the board can still pull this back and not adopt the complete debris management plan next week, correct?
That is correct, sir. What I would say, for the purpose of the board to make you feel more comfortable, is it would be to approve them to move forward with the debris plan, and then based upon your approval of that plan next week, so that way they can move forward with the debris plan under the premise that it's going to be funded, and then next week, by that time, I would sure hope so, and normally we will have a response by then.
Yeah, we make a lot of adjustments if in fact it didn't come, the money didn't come, and our debris plan would look quite different. So I just want to make sure we're not locked into the plan and then all of a sudden we get.
That's not from our standpoint, no. It's your plan, it's always a disaster, as we always say, they're a local disaster. We're here to support you, but we're here for the technical support and everything for the debris plan, and then to move forward with the debris removal. So if over the next week, the debris plan, they'll put it together real fast. It'll be ready by next Tuesday. And by that time, I feel pretty confident that we'll have a response. I felt pretty confident we have it today, but it may still come later today.
There's still several hours in the day.
I know, and I always use that. Stuff moves slow.
5 o'clock somewhere.
We'll cover the wiring fee.
Okay.
That work.
Yeah.
Supervisor Smith.
Well, I was just going to say that the facts are that it has been requested. So, yeah.
That's back, so okay.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that as long as we're not.
It looks like we're going to
Yeah.
get it, but, until we do, not count the chicken before they hatch. So,
Checks in the mail.
Checks in the mail. We could say that, the checks in the mail.
That's right.
but it's not.
All right, so with that changed wording as presented by Matt Carey, we have consideration of resolution, which is titled option 2. Is there an offering of the resolution?
I'll offer the resolution.
Resolution's been offered by Supervisor Steele. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Supervisors Comstock.
Aye.
Smith.
Right?
Steele.
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
Barrington.
Aye. Any other business that you need to?
I
Does that
had
cover everything?
item C, just delegate to me the authority to sign the grant agreement and so forth. I guess we could probably actually wait until next Tuesday, couldn't we, Sean, on that, to actually have the board approve the grant assurances? Okay. so-
Regarding temporary shelters?
So we don't need to, no, that's on my memo, item C.
Okay, I thought you were,
We can present the grant to the board next Tuesday. So we don't have to act on C.
okay, is there anything else?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Comstock?
if I may, we had another incident, and in a special meeting, we cannot take anything that's not on the agenda I'll have board member comments. I was advised if I could tie this into the Rocky incident, I could talk about it for a very few minutes, and I can't. The Jerusalem incident, I can just take a few minutes and make a very short presentation.
Yeah, we can either do that or warrant an extra for.
So we can't do
emergency.
extras.
It's really not, a special meeting doesn't usually have extras.
Extras, you can't usually
but-
qualify extras. So if we keep it within the auspice of the fire, wouldn't it be appropriate for information?
Yes.
It's all
As long as
interrelated.
it's within
It's all
the Rocky
interrelated.
complex, it's still part of the discussion.
If there's any litigation, I'll take the heat, so where's it comes down.
Deal. Hire. Give me a hand, Jeff. Take this thing up. You're taller than me. As everyone's aware, starting Sunday afternoon, about 3:30, another incident happened. It's called the Jerusalem incident. And at this point, 12,000 acres is burning right back into the Rocky complex. It's expected to get a whole lot larger than it is right now. But the weather conditions as they are with the westerly winds is taking it into unpopulated areas. It's basically brush rocks and rattlesnakes out there. There are some concerns on the western edge and the southern edge. The western edge is the Sheriff's Department had issued, what would you call them, Brent? They were
Evacuation advisories or notifications that people's property may be threatened in the near future, but we don't do mandatory evacuations until it looks like the fire's getting ready to move in
Yes.
those areas.
Said it's at 12,000 acres right now. CAL FIRE has
Jim,
just been...
is there any way you can grab that mic, just
Sure.
so we can pick it up, if you don't mind? Thank you.
As I said, this is 12,000 acres now, is now burned back into, I think it's already connected with the Rocky complex as of this morning, is that correct?
Right, I believe so, yes.
And the western edge here, the preliminary evacuation notice is up in the Spruce Grove Road, Jerusalem Valley Road area. And actually, my ranch, we got one. We're down right in this area. And they've been working very, very, very hard to keep it contained on the eastern edge of Pewter Creek, doing a very good job of it there. The fire crews, convict crews, dozers, everything is in there. This area back in here is going to continue to grow. That's a given. They said this morning it may double again, but that's still not threatening any structures. Friday, it's going to get a lot hotter. There'll be some probably northwest winds, and that is a concern. There's a 60,000 volt PG&E line that PG&E is out working right now to try to clear any extra debris out of that. It's very important that that not get affected as it supplies most of the power for Southern Lake County and up into Clear Lake and Lower Lake area. This ties right in. It's same thing. It's fuel driven. It's not specific high winds or anything. It's the same thing, very dry conditions. The brush pits, Fowler, Petticoat, and Bishop Mountain look kind of like a moonscape now. I'm familiar with those from years of living here and hunted out in those areas. It's burned slick. At this point, no structures have been lost. They have done an outstanding job of protecting structures and life and property out there. And we need to give our compliments once again to our local fire agencies, CAL FIRE, to the Sheriff's Department for that outstanding effort that they have put forth. I personally want to thank all of them, and I'm sure all of our board members do. We probably can't entertain any questions because we're really not supposed to be talking about this, I guess, right?
You tied it in nicely.
Good enough. Any questions? I'll answer what I can before I get in trouble.
Let me answer a Rocky Fire question, which leads to the Jerusalem in order.
Very nice.
Not bad. In the Rocky Fire, the burn history was predated records. Is it similar here?
No.
We do have
Majority
fires.
of what has burned previously. There are some areas that I know personally haven't burned in 60 years, being 65 years old. I remember that they hadn't burned. It's not into those areas yet. An area called Hunting Creek, it's getting into that. That hasn't burned for probably 30, 40 years. to the west of that, what's now the Coast Guard Loran Station, hasn't burned since the 1940s. And that brush is 15 feet high, and you couldn't walk through it if you were a mouse. So that would be a problem if it got in there. Like I said, air tankers, bulldozers, hand crews. A gentleman, I think works at the Department of Corrections, saw him yesterday and said, any way to get hand crews in here without walking all the way through Jerusalem Valley? Follow me, I'll show you how to get in there. And they've done an outstanding job. And as I said, it ties directly into the Rocky incident. For the record. Any other questions? Thank you. It's going to get bigger. You're going to see a big smoke plume again this afternoon. Most of it is burning back into the Rocky area, and these areas, it's going to look very, very, very bad. As long as the winds remain coming from the west, they're cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to hold in those areas. Okay? Thank you. You got things.
Anything further, Matt or Anita? Okay. Thank you all for being here and all your hard work, and appreciate it. And this will conclude our public